beyond belief. He will not believe it. He will not believe what's going to happen to him.
Yeah.
Beyond his worst nightmares. Sell one more record.
This attorney I found, I interviewed several, and I picked the nastiest son of a I could find. Once I make that phone call, this guy is just going to destroy everybody in sight. Any devious, nasty, cruel way that he can do it.
FBI investigators working on the Sean Diddy Combs case have dropped a bombshell, claiming that Michael Jackson wasn't just smeared by the mainstream media, he was murdered by the record industry.
The FBI were investigating Jackson for 10 full years, and they presented no evidence of criminal conduct on Jackson's part. The files have been declassified and you can view them yourself. And following are pages like this where they have the ID of the different devices and they all say nothing. Literally, they all say this. They found nothing.
Then the record companies really do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially the black artists.
Something huge is unraveling right now in the Michael Jackson case, and the FBI does not want you connecting the dots. Diddy's trial started earlier this week, and a name has surfaced that's got investigators and insiders panicking. A man who used to run security for Diddy has been exposed as having also worked for Michael Jackson. Not only that, he was present when MJ died and was hired without MJ's approval by AEG, the same company organizing MJ's comeback tour that sadly never happened. And here's where it gets wild. This same man reportedly has intelligence ties, as in government agencies. So why was a man with alleged federal connections placed so close to Michael Jackson right before his mysterious death? Was Michael Jackson set up? And if so, by who? Well, here's where it gets messy. MJ publicly accused Sony Records of sabotaging their artists and called out their CEO, Tommy Mottola, as racist, mean, and even devilish. At the time, people wrote it off as paranoia, but now we know Mottola had shady ties to both Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein, two men linked to elite criminal networks and, allegedly, to US and foreign intelligence operations too. And it gets darker. There's now growing speculation that Sony tried to pay off the FBI to target Jackson, to destroy his image and gain control over the lucrative music catalog he owned, including Beatles classics and more. This isn't conspiracy talk anymore. The evidence is stacking up. And by the time Diddy's trial ends, we might finally have proof that powerful people really did set up Michael Jackson. But there's a lot more to unpack here. So let's break it down.
Sony, Tommy Mottola. Tommy Mottola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very devilish.
Michael Jackson's name is back in the headlines again, and now that the Diddy trial has started, some old theories about MJ are starting to make a lot more sense. People are talking again about how he might have been accused of those horrible crimes just so certain powerful folks could ruin his name and steal his music catalog. And now more people in the industry are finally speaking up. Last month, legendary guitarist Carlos Santana also said he believes MJ was innocent and claimed that hostile forces were out to destroy him. Santana, who recently released a new album that features an instrumental cover of Michael's song Stranger in Moscow, told The Independent that he never believed MJ was guilty of the crimes he's been accused of and claimed there was an aggressive agenda to destroy MJ. Santana said, "The hostile forces on this planet have an agenda, and that's to destroy your light. Michael Jackson did a lot of great things with his money for children, and the hostile forces didn't like it." And when asked what exactly are these hostile forces, Santana said, "The hostile forces are Satan, Lucifer, and the devil. Michael Jackson is a threat to darkness because we bring so much light that other people believe they're also worthy to share their own light. That's really what it's about." Now, it's interesting that Santana mentioned the devil, because that's exactly what Michael used to call Sony CEO Tommy Mottola. Back in the early 2000s, MJ started publicly calling out Sony Music and its then chairman, Tommy Mottola. At a press conference and in several interviews, MJ straight up called Mottola a racist and even went as far as calling him the devil. MJ believed Mottola was part of a bigger system that conspires against black artists and uses dirty tactics to keep control over their music.
This is very important because throughout the years, black artists have been taken advantage of completely. And it's time now that we have to put a stop to this incredible injustice. And like Mrs. Sharpton was saying, people from James Brown to Sammy Davis Jr., some of the real pioneers that inspired me to be the entertainer that I am. These artists are always on tour because if they stopped touring, they would totally go broken. And it's been, the record companies really, really do conspire against their artists. They steal, they cheat, they do whatever they can, especially the black artists.
Yeah. Now let me say this.
Sony, Tommy Mottola. Tommy Mottola is the president of the record division. He is a mean, he's a racist, and he's very, very, very devilish.
But Michael didn't just start calling out Sony and Tommy Mottola for no reason. Decades before that, MJ pulled off one of the smartest moves in music history, one that Sony never forgave him for. Back in 1985, MJ bought ATV Music Publishing for about $47.5 million, and this gave him the rights to a huge catalog, including over 250 Beatles songs. A few years later, Sony wanted a piece of that, so they teamed up with MJ in 1995 to form Sony ATV. However, even though Sony was a giant company, MJ still owned 50% and had equal control. That meant he basically owned half of Sony's entire music publishing arm, which included tons of other artists' songs too. And that's when things got ugly between him and Tommy Mottola. MJ started calling him out publicly, accusing him of being corrupt and even calling him the devil. And eventually, MJ walked away from Sony and went independent. However, he still kept his share of that massive catalog, and he openly talked about how Sony was after him to get revenge.
Because now I'm a free agent. I just owe Sony one more album. It's just a box set, really. It's with 2 new songs, which I've written ages ago. Because every album that I record, I write, like, literally, I'm telling you the truth, I write at least 120 songs every album I do. So I can do the box set and just give them any 2 songs. So I'm leaving Sony a free agent, owning half of Sony. So I own half of Sony's publishing, and I'm leaving them, and they're very angry at me because of it. But I just did good business, you know. So the way they get revenge is to try and destroy my album. But I've always said, you know, good art never dies. And Tommy Mottola is a devil. She doesn't trust him, and he is a horrible human being. And we have to continue our drive until he's terminated.
But here's where the whole thing turns real dark. In 2003, right as MJ was in the middle of his battle with Sony for control of his catalog, a second wave of those disturbing allegations hit, accusing MJ of harming multiple boys. The media goes nuclear, and MJ's name, reputation, and image were destroyed almost overnight. And who benefits? Sony. As public pressure grew, MJ's financial troubles got worse, and his grip on his catalog weakened. Now consider that Sony is a massive multinational corporation with deep connections in law enforcement, media, and government. It's not far-fetched to think that executives could have quietly leaned on allies inside the FBI or LAPD to turn up the heat or look the other way as the smear campaign unfolded. We already know from secret FBI operations like COINTELPRO that U.S. intelligence has a long history of targeting high-profile black leaders when they get too powerful.
In the 1960s, the Black Liberation Movement was the #1 target of COINTELPRO. And the Black Panther Party specifically was targeted by J. Edgar Hoover.
Those are words of legendary Assata Shakur speaking on the counterintelligence program that was orchestrated by the FBI and CIA to infiltrate black liberation movements. And what's crazy is, she the first black woman to ever be placed on the FBI's most wanted terror list. Crazy.
The FBI and the CIA and all of the repressive forces in the United States government. And so I was one of those young people who was targeted by COINTELPRO because I was an activist, because I was opposed to the United States government's policies, because I was opposed to racism. And so I ultimately had to go underground. I was ultimately captured.
But COINTELPRO didn't just target black activists and political leaders. They also went after artists, including Jimi Hendrix, Aretha Franklin, Bob Marley, Eartha Kitt, and many others. And even though COINTELPRO officially ended in 1971, the tactics never really went away. They just got more covert and privatized. By the time Michael Jackson was battling those allegations and corporate sabotage in the 1990s and 2000s, the FBI had already proved it was willing to work with powerful institutions to destroy the reputations of influential black figures. And they used different tactics: surveillance, media manipulation, character assassination, legal harassment. So even if COINTELPRO by name was dead, the playbook lived on. Now, as for Sony, keep in mind that billions were at stake. MJ owned half of Sony ATV, one of the most valuable music catalogs in the world. MJ had the power to challenge the industry status quo, and he was speaking out loudly about racism, corruption, and exploitation in the music business. And that's when things got dangerous for him. So right as MJ began calling Tony Mottola racist and devilish, accusers who previously claimed Michael never touched them suddenly changed their story. Now, we know from documents released under the Freedom of Information Act that the FBI was actively investigating Michael for a decade, even when no charges were filed. But why? Who pushed for that? Did Sony pressure the feds to target MJ and build a case before the accusers even entered the picture? Well, it's not far-fetched at all. Corporations and federal agencies work hand in hand all the time, especially when there's something worth billions on the line. Add in MJ's race, his global influence, and his fight against industry puppet masters, and you've got the perfect target. Now, here's another crazy part. For more than a decade, Michael Jackson was one of the most investigated people of the 20th century. Dozens of law enforcement agencies, including the LAPD, NYPD, Santa Barbara Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and multiple district attorneys, scrutinized every part of his life. Neverland Ranch was raided multiple times, and MJ was put under a microscope like no other celebrity. And still, after all that, the feds found nothing. Not a single piece of solid evidence to support the accusations against him. What's also interesting is that the FBI files state that Michael was investigated between 1993 and 1994, and separately between 2004 and 2005. According to the declassified documents, Jackson was investigated by California law enforcement agencies for possible CM. He was acquitted of all such charges. The FBI provided technical and investigative assistance to these agencies during the cases. The Bureau also investigated threats made against Mr. Jackson and others by an individual who was later imprisoned for these crimes. These investigations occurred between 1992 and 2005. So, according to the FBI, they helped California police during two key time periods, 1993 to 1994 and 2004 to 2005. And what was happening with Michael Jackson during those exact years? Well, that's when the Jordan Chandler and Gavin Arvizo accusations came out. MJ was later put on trial over the Arvizo case. However, he was found not guilty on all charges in June 2005. And just 4 years later, on June 25, 2009, MJ died under very strange circumstances, right before a massive comeback tour that would have restored his public image and helped him regain financial and creative control. And get this, soon after MJ died, Sony signed a $250 million deal for his unreleased music, the biggest record deal in history at the time. In other words, the same company he accused of trying to ruin him profited hugely from his death. But if you thought this was sketchy, wait till you hear about the possible Diddy connection to MJ's death. Remember that lawsuit filed against Diddy by his former producer Lil Rod? Well, in this lawsuit, Lil Rod claimed that Diddy's head of security, Fahim Muhammad, had close ties with law enforcement and helped cover up Diddy's alleged crimes. The lawsuit states, Mr. Combs made it clear that his head of security, Fahim Muhammad, had the power to make people and problems disappear. Mr. Combs instructs his staff to always contact Mr. Muhammad if they are ever pulled over by the police in Miami or California. The lawsuit also mentions that Diddy's powerful industry friends employed and empowered Fahim to pay off law enforcement. Now, here's where things get even crazier. It turns out Fahim was also MJ's head of security, and he was there the night Michael died. When Fahim testified at Dr. Conrad Murray's trial, he said he was hired as MJ's chief of security just 10 months before Michael passed.
At that point in time, how long had you worked security for Mr. Jackson?
Approximately 10 months.
And what were your responsibilities?
I was the chief of his security, so my responsibilities ranged from making sure his house was protected, making sure his children were protected, and making sure his day-to-day activities and movement was all safe and planned and mapped out.
But hold up. Fahim was fresh out of college with a business degree and was only 20 or 21 years old when he got this job. So why would the Michael Jackson choose someone that young and inexperienced to run his security? Well, according to social media investigator Ian Carroll, it might not have been Michael who hired Fahim at all. It could have been someone else pulling the strings.
For most of Jackson's career, his head of security was Bill Bray, who was his mentor and basically his father. And the two were extremely close. Bill ran his security until he was 70 when he retired, and Jackson continued to pay his medical bills until he died at age 80. But then once Bill retired, Jackson was then protected by other security people that came and went, and he wound up with this guy who has direct connections to Diddy's blackmail operations, who was directly complicit in covering up crimes for Diddy and covering up abuse, prostitution, human trafficking. This is the guy that was protecting Michael Jackson the day that he died. The day that he was overdosed on after he was probably already asleep, and the only witnesses, there were no witnesses to the crime. I'm honestly kind of surprised that this guy never got checked into as a suspect.
But that's not all. Carroll also pointed out that Fahim might have connections to intelligence agencies, and this could have been part of a bigger plan to set Michael up for something he didn't actually do. And when that plan failed and he was acquitted of all charges, they might have decided to take him out for good.
I was looking up Fahim, and where did I find another article about him? On Penn State, the Wharton School. He didn't attend it as a student, he was invited as a speaker for this Wharton real estate entrepreneurship event. Which makes perfect sense. He has a real estate investment company or whatever, but if you've been following along, you would know that the Wharton School comes up an awful lot when we're talking about intelligence agencies and people associated with the CIA and the FBI, etc. Just thought it was interesting that they invited him to be a honored speaker at their event. And now, here's the best part. Check this out. This is in all of his bios, by the way, but we're pointing it out now. In 2008, Fahim graduated from Sacramento State University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in Business Administration with a concentration in real estate and marketing. Okay? Do you realize what's wrong with that yet? Anything coming to mind? When did Michael Jackson die? June 25th, 2009. Jackson died from cardiac arrest caused by a propofol and benzodiazepine overdose, caused by his doctor apparently. Hold up. Hold the phone. Pause. Why is a dude who just graduated college last year with a business and real estate degree the head of security for the king of pop, for Michael Jackson, the most famous musician of all time? What's going on?
But just when you think you've heard it all, it turns out that Tommy Mottola, the same Sony executive MJ accused of sabotaging him, had ties to both Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein. Mottola sold his house on Star Island to Diddy in 2003, right when MJ was publicly battling Sony and calling Mottola the devil. And then Mottola was also named in Epstein documents, which showed that Epstein had multiple phone calls with Mottola. So given all this, it makes you seriously wonder just how deep this web of influence goes when it comes to Michael Jackson's downfall. When you put all the pieces together, it's hard to ignore the possibility that Sony and the FBI might have worked together to destroy MJ. The timing, the smear campaigns, the strange circumstances around his death, it all points to something bigger behind the scenes. But what's your take on this theory that Sony and the feds conspired against MJ? And do you think the truth will come out now that Diddy's on trial? Or will the higher-ups make sure it stays buried forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't miss out on this next video.